Welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week. Mm-hmm. What have you brought to the table today?
I am bringing an article called May Day, Exporting the Southern Plantocracy to the table. This was published in Scalawag magazine by Sherronda J, Troutman, and Aarohi Sheth, and is an exploration of the way the ruling class has combined anti-Blackness and anti-labor politics and sentiment across the South to divide the working class and keep wages down and working conditions really poor.
Yeah.
The article opens with a definition of plantocracy, which I thought would be helpful to ground our discussion.
Okay.
So it's, quote, a government or political system that consists of a small, moneyed ruling class overseeing a large population of servants, slaves, or serfs, descriptive of any period of slavery and indentureship, particularly that of the early American South. One of the things I really appreciated about the article opening with this is how clear the definition is.
Yeah.
This is a clear tie to the economy that we're operating under, and it's worse some places than others. Mm-hmm. But this sets up the whole argument about how this started in the South and has been exported across the country and the economy through wealthy, elite, ruling class folks.
Yes.
So thought that was a great place to start and introduce the piece. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that definition. I don't think I might not have done that. So I'm glad you brought that. And it was great for them to ground the piece with that definition. And yeah, I appreciated their brilliant analysis around the South being a barometer and a nexus point for what we've seen and experienced, not just in the South, certainly there, but all over the country, really, as it relates to capitalism and wealth inequality and worker exploitation and just the overall fight for labor rights. And so at one point in the piece, they say, quote, to think labor in the South thus forces a theory of labor and capitalist transformation over time that refuses to deny the glaring anti-Black antagonisms that structure the notion of proletarianization. Who gets to be considered workers, laborers? What work and labor is considered valid and coherent, and at a higher scale, how and why the South as the zone of perpetual underdevelopment indexes the progress, development, and sustainability of its non-Southern counterparts. In other words, to consider Southern labor is to consider the blackened labor of the South in generating the exploitation and extraction standards through which the world accumulates capital, disciplines labor, and invests in the systems of violent oppression labor struggles fight to overcome. From the rice, tobacco, cotton, sugarcane, and indigo of the plantation to the sharecropping, debt peonage, and convict leasing of Jim Crow and beyond, the South has historically been the region that heralds the most exploitative anti-worker labor practices because the South is the site of the plantation. Southern labor in the afterlife of slavery thus requires a labor movement that seeks to end the plantocracy's prevailing terms of order, meaning it must be abolitionist and revolutionary in its intent. And I feel like there's a lot to unpack in that statement, right?
Yeah.
But I think one of the biggest pieces of analysis here is that, the South's version of labor is rooted in its history of anti-Blackness and slavery and violence. And so that makes what they've experienced there and continue to experience there both unique and uniquely troubling. And so any labor-related fight in the South is not only important for the people there, but I think it will also be helpful beyond the South as well.
Yeah, and I think about the ways that large car companies have come to build plants in the South.
Yeah.
Not necessarily U.S. automakers.
Right.
But the automakers who were foreign, where did they build their plants? A lot of them built them in the South.
Yep.
And I think about I think we talked about it a few years ago, the Nissan fight for a union at a plant in the South. I forget exactly what state now. And the anti-labor, anti-union sentiment that the plant put out across everywhere. And that vote ultimately failed because of the way that the politics played out,
right,
in terms of the owners and the bosses try to crack down on it
Absolutely.
even happening. And just the way that it feels like that plantocracy comes home when international companies come in to build something. Where are they building those things?
Absolutely. Where they can be where they think they could be most successful in making that happen.
Yeah, and at the lowest cost possible in an exploited labor class in the South that's exploited because of the nexus of anti-Blackness and anti-labor sentiment.
Yeah, right. And this piece gets to this, but the union piece too, being so anti-union as well.
Yeah. Appreciated a lot of things in this, and they explored a lot. And one of the things that they talked about was weapons manufacture.
Oh, yeah.
So they say, quote, "We must also interrogate the role of the South as a laboratory for weaponry, surveillance technologies, artificial intelligence systems, data centers, and other modes of violence that are eventually exported to other parts of the country and the world." In Geely and Cop City, Tactical Villages and Global Policing, Eva Dickerson stages such an interrogation by indicating the public-private partnership model at the heart of the Atlanta Way, responsible for making Atlanta a global city and desirable destination for mega sporting events, corporate headquarters, and conventions. It is also this model that appeases the city's development regime, responsible for decades of uneven development, mass displacement, and gentrification, that made possible both the Georgia International Law Enforcement Exchange, GLE, deadly exchange program with Israel, and the Cop City training facility. And so much of this is at the heart of things we've talked about on the show over the last 5 years. From Beth Howard a few weeks ago, naming that whiteness will give people a little treat, like a job making weapons to kill people who are over there. Or when we've talked about the need for an internationalist perspective and action from labor movement to recognize when they're selling out their fellow workers who live and work in other countries.
Right.
And again, a little preview into the Atlanta Way and Cop City as we prepare to talk about that in the book that we might be talking about sometime soon.
Oh, a little tease there.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, it was fascinating to, they touched on so much in this piece, so I didn't expect that when they started talking about the South being this laboratory for weaponry and surveillance and all of that. I was like, oh, wow, this is comprehensive in so many ways.
So many things.
Yeah. So it was great getting to learn about that. It was also great getting to learn more about the history of labor and union organizing in the South, because that work has been so important in terms of making progress happen. But it was also telling in terms of how much more work is necessary. So here's a little bit about what they share in the piece. Quote, "Southerners have consistently resisted against the ruling class, withholding their labor. From the 1934 textile strike, the largest single industry strike in U.S. history, with over 400,000 mostly Southern workers walking off their jobs to demand higher wages, better working conditions, shorter hours, and union recognition, to the recent Alabama prison labor strikes, Southern workers have always recognized the power of our labor and its place within larger exploitative capitalist and carceral systems." Loved that. A little bit later on, they say, quote, "Even now, according to the Southern Workers Assembly, workers in the Southern U.S. have the lowest wages in the country, leading to the highest poverty levels. We have the weakest worker protections and badly underfunded public services, leading to the worst health outcomes and the shortest lifespans. And fewer than 5% of workers have collective bargaining. Black farmers' unions and alliances in the South have historically fought against economic exploitation and land loss. For example, the Sharecroppers Union formed during the Great Depression in Alabama, fighting against exploitative landlords and the oppressive debt peonage system that kept many farmers trapped in poverty. The Southern Tenant Farmers Union was formed in 1934 in Arkansas and protested against evictions and poor conditions, organizing strikes for higher pay and better treatment for sharecroppers. In 1935, the Southern Tenant Farmers Union successfully organized a cotton picker strike, raising wages. Leaders of the Southern states recognized the power of labor strikes and collective bargaining, and these largely conservative, pro-business political leaders continually worked to uphold anti-union attitudes and legislation throughout the South. And so we see the effort and the energy and the work that has happened to make life and working conditions better for Southern workers throughout history, which is amazing. But there's still a long way to go, especially given the, as I mentioned earlier, the anti-union stance of businesses in the South and just deeply rooted inequities and violence that has plagued the South and its workers for generations, really.
Yeah, and I think about the way that anti-socialist, anti-communist political sentiment in particular has been tied to anti-Blackness and how
Yes.
that all seems tied in here, particularly as you talk about those Alabama sharecroppers organizing for better wages and thinking about Robin D.G. Kelly's book that's called Hammer and Hoe, which was about Black communists, I think in the Jim Crow South, I think specifically in Alabama, it might be about these people who are mentioned in this particular article. And so it might be good to tie that in and get back to that at some point because, Robin D.G. Kelly is great.
Yeah.
So at one point, another argument they make, they say the South determines the limit and extent by which all labor may be exploited.
Yes.
Which feels so accurate. I started talking about it earlier with international corporations coming in. So if they can get away with it in the South, they can export that to all of us.
Yes.
And it reminds me of when Du Bois said that as the South goes, so goes the nation.
Yes.
The South is a barometer for so many things.
Right.
And it's been labeled a sacrifice zone. And as we know, if they can throw people away in one place, they can throw people away in another place.
Yes.
And if they can make one place a sacrifice zone, they can come for your place, whatever that is.
Absolutely.
And as we look at more and more data centers being built, there will be more sacrifices demanded of the South and of all of us to better serve big tech and AI companies and more. And I'm so appreciative of the folks who are organizing against data centers across the country, even the little social media posts I see that people post that are like, none of this is worth giving up for a single data center.
Exactly.
And I think that more and more of that is coming up for people. They're so unpopular.
Yes.
And to sacrifice any of our well-being, any of our land, anything for
any of our hard-earned money.
just to be asked to let go of any of that for a huge multinational conglomerate tech company who's making billions of dollars and worth billions of dollars is so ridiculous.
Yes.
And I think people are seeing that more. And I think they're seeing the way that is tied into the way that wages are being depressed and that our economic feasibility, survivability, even in this current time is tied into the way that we're being exploited in these data centers. Like all of it's connected.
It's
I
all
think
connected.
People are starting to see that a little bit more because of the way that we're seeing how regular people are having to foot the bill for the electric grid.
Yes.
That these data centers are demanding more access to and more bandwidth for.
Right. Yeah. I think I have been so moved by seeing on social media just images of town halls and whatnot with just regular people showing up and being like, no, like, I think you're right. People are hip to what these data centers mean for our day-to-day lives, our wallets, everything, our environment, all of it. And so people are furious and really standing up against it. And I love your point here and their point in this piece about the South is the place where a lot of this is happening and the exploitation is real. And you talked about it being a sacrifice zone. If it can happen there.
Yeah, they'll take it wherever.
They'll take it wherever.
And it reminds me, this wasn't in the South, but in Utah recently, there was a plan approved for Kevin O'Leary, which another reason not to watch Shark Tank.
Yeah.
Because he's a trash human being who wants to build a data center that is the size of 9 Walmarts or something, and will be off grid, but it'll be off grid because it's using natural gas. And so what's the environmental output for that?
Yeah.
And it's going to use more energy than the entire state of Utah.
It's wild when you say stuff like that, right?
The entire state of Utah uses less energy than this data center will.
Right.
And that just to think that that's what we have to sacrifice for the good of the economy makes no sense
At all.
And all of it's connected to what this article is
Yes.
about in terms of people being disposable for the success of capitalism.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of that, this is kind of related. One of the things that they talk about in this piece that really stood out to me is just the experience of Black women in the South. And they talk about this from lots of perspectives, one being from the perspective of the Trump administration's attacks on DEI that led to some 300,000 Black women being forced out of their federal and public service jobs. And then just also the general lived experiences and labor experiences of Black women in the South. And so one of the things they talk about in this piece is this, quote, as Nakia Green Young writes for the EDU Ledger, Black women have historically been among the most consistent participants in the American workforce. Even during periods when other groups of women were discouraged or prevented from working, Black women labored inside homes, hospitals, classrooms, factories, and government offices to ensure stability for their families and communities. The South has always depended heavily on Black women's labor. From caregiving and education to community organizing and public service, Black women have been the backbone of Southern economic life. Economists recognize the significance of Black women's labor to Southern economic life and the economy at large, applying the labor statistics regarding Black women's employment to shape their understanding of economic and employment trends across the nation. Jessica Fulton, a senior fellow at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, told the 19th News that, quote, Black workers, and particularly Black women, show up as a canary in the coal mine, giving a picture of what may happen to everyone else later, end quote. And I mainly wanted to pull this quote from the piece to amplify it here because we know all of this is true. Black women are some of, if not the most, disrespected people in this country, period, full stop. And so any organizing work and fight to uplift and liberate Black women is undoubtedly and unequivocally necessary. But we also know from way back when we read the Combahee River Collective statement that if Black women are free, then we're all free. And I think this piece really just kind of continued that analysis for me here in the context of Southern Black women, but it applies certainly more broadly than that as well.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important point. I think so many Black women in particular lost those, as you mentioned here, federal jobs,
right?
Government jobs,
yeah,
that were traditionally very stable,
yep,
and decent paying and really great benefits.
Yeah.
And to lose all those people is a real real issue that I think is going to be very difficult to recover from.
Yeah.
And we're not going to feel the repercussions of for a while,
yeah,
I think. And so that's also a pain point that I don't think we've even necessarily felt yet as a country. Those individual people have obviously felt it, but
right.
it's something that I think is still coming. What we feel from
yes,
that is still
I think the sort of breadth and depth of what we'll feel is to come. But I think we've already felt it to some extent in terms of, that's a lot of expertise and wisdom, right? That these Black women had in these jobs that are just now gone because, of quote unquote DEI being this boogeyman for the current administration. And so it's just real stupid.
Yeah. So, all right, well, let's talk about application.
Okay.
How do we apply this article to our day-to-day lives and work? My application comes from the introduction because I think it's a great encapsulation of what we've been talking about. And it ties into what you talked about at one point earlier, too.
Okay.
So there's a little bit of overlap here. From the rice, tobacco, cotton, sugarcane, and indigo of the plantation to sharecropping, debt peonage, and convict leasing of Jim Crow and beyond, the South has historically been the region that heralds the most exploitative anti-worker labor practices because the South is the site of the plantation. Southern labor in the afterlife of slavery thus requires a labor movement that seeks to end the plantocracy's prevailing terms of order, meaning it must be abolitionist and revolutionary in its intent. And I wanted to bring that back.
Yeah.
I know you talked about it already, but that's the kind of revolutionary and abolitionist movement. That's what we need across the country.
Yes.
We need it everywhere. And there are points right now too, where even last week, Governor Abigail Spanberger in Virginia vetoed a bill that would have provided collective bargaining rights for state employees in Virginia. And so this is somebody who was elected because the other choice was ridiculous.
Yeah. The other choice was not a choice.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of reasons why Spanberger's in that seat. But allegedly, this is a Democrat, and allegedly Democrats are for the working people, and allegedly that means nothing when you veto a bill that would provide worker rights.
Yeah, wow.
Collective bargaining rights to your employees. And I'll share, as a former state employee in Virginia at an institution, one of the things that was a third degree, whatever term was, point of firing is talking about collective bargaining.
Wow.
So it's easy to fire people who start talking about that.
Yeah.
So that's also the conditions in which people who are state employees are working. in the state of Virginia and would have been overturned.
Yep.
And so that's not the kind of revolutionary and abolitionist movement that we need. So it's clear how much plantation politics have influenced our economy and continue to influence our economy through articles like this and the 1619 Project we read in our first few episodes back in 2021. This exploitative economy, the oppression economy, as Liberation in a Generation termed it, is inherently anti-Black and anti-worker because its foundations are in enslavement and indentured servitude.
Wow.
So creating a just system for all of us goes back at least that far and even farther, really.
Yeah.
So that's my application, is that the abolitionist and revolutionary worker movement is so needed. So that's mine. What about you?
Go off, brother. I see.
Thank you.
I love it.
Thank you.
I had not heard about that in Virginia.
Yeah.
I feel like she has been doing some good work, but that is not it at all, right?
Nope.
And you're right. It's so steeped in all of this.
Well, it reminded me too, you talked about the anti-labor politicians who were in place in the South, and this being sort of a through line of that history of being anti-worker.
Damn.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's great application. Mine comes from how they close this piece, because I think it contains an important warning for all of us as it relates to what's happening in the South, right? So the final words of this piece are, quote, "Our coverage of Southern labor is intended to increase our audience's political literacy. With this series and our larger work, we interrogate how the South, rendered a sacrifice zone, and home to the nation's largest concentration of surplus populations, deemed fundamentally incompatible with regional, national, and global progress, determines the limit and extent by which all labor may be exploited." Right? And you talked about this a little bit earlier. I mentioned earlier, too, how they make it clear that the South is this nexus point and for a broader understanding of capitalism and exploitation and labor rights in the United States. But I think their final words of this piece, how all labor can be exploited in similar ways to what has happened in the South, is the key. And so to me, it's a significant warning to all of us, and it just makes clear the imperative for why labor rights organizing is necessary. And clearly, I mean, Virginia is the South. It's so close to home for us here too, but it's necessary everywhere.
Yeah, Virginia is the South, despite what some people on social media have been talking about, where they drew
100% the South.
a circle around things and excluded
get out
North
of here.
Carolina and Virginia.
Like what?
So great application. Let's talk about homework.
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? My homework comes from this quote. "Southern anti-union sentiment runs deep, growing in popularity following the Civil War and the abolition of plantation slavery. White business owners squashed union efforts from fear that an organized Southern labor force would empower formerly enslaved Black workers and dismantle the long-established racial and socioeconomic order of the South." And so in that quote, there's a link of a brief report from State of the South about how we create more unions in the South to begin to push back on this history.
Awesome.
Which, just to mention, that history is a direct through line to Bacon's Rebellion, right?
Yes.
That anti-labor, anti-union sentiment runs deep because white business owners squashing those union efforts, their fear is solidarity across race between working class Black people and working class white people.
Right.
Who that's why whiteness exists, is because of that fear of working class solidarity across race. And so add this to the list of sales tax and school choice of the reasons why we have white supremacy in this history, is that anti-Black, anti-worker sentiment that is pervasive across so much of the South.
And as we have talked about, at the country as well.
And the country, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. Well, that report sounds like a good one to read. In addition to that, I kind of want to read the rest of this series, the Southern Labor series in Scalawag, because this piece was great and we learned a lot from it. And it just kind of made me think, when I saw that it was a series, like, we've read a bunch of great series this year, between, this one and the one in the Forge that we started last week. And so I'd love for us to continue to read this series with Scalawag. I also want to check out a journal article that was referenced in this piece. It was written by Bobby Wilson, and it's called America's Johannesburg, Industrialization and Racial Transformation in Birmingham, which just kind of sounds like a fascinating read to me and a good case study for understanding the transformation and evolution of race in the South in the context of geography and history and the application of that. So it's definitely it's an academic journal article, but who knows? I definitely love to read it. I don't know if we'll talk about it here, but I want to check it out.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah.
Sounds great. And I've already found it, so we'll print it out after this.
Look at that.
And start reading it.
Perfect.
All right, Damien, you're up next time. What do you bring to the table in our next episode?
Well, you spoiled it a little bit earlier. You didn't spoil it. Teased it. That was the word. You teased it. I am going to bring our May book to the table for us to talk about next week. And that book is called No Cop City, No Cop World, Lessons from the Movement. It was edited by Carl Franklin, Micah Herskind, and Mariah Parker, and published just a year ago by our friends over at Haymarket Books. And so here's part of the description of the book on Haymarket's website. Quote, "The Stop Cop City movement is a decentralized effort to stop the construction of a $120 million police training facility and the destruction of 170 acres of the Weelonee Forest outside of Atlanta, Georgia. This is the first collection of essays bringing together organizers and activists who have been involved in the years-long struggle to stop Cop City, connecting movements for environmental justice, police abolition, and indigenous sovereignty. This expansive collection highlights the strategy, tactics, and ideologies that transformed a local collective action into a powerful international movement." Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I'm maybe just a little bit over halfway done this book. It has been phenomenal. These essays are incredible. So many brilliant folks doing incredible work down there to learn from. And so I'm really excited to finish this book and obviously to get to talk to you about it next week.
Yeah, it's been really great. I think I'm about as far along in it as you are.
Okay.
And so I am looking forward to finishing it and also talking about it here. Because it's written by so many different people, there's so many different perspectives and lessons, I think, that it's going to be hard for me to figure out what to talk about and how to piece things together, which is frequently the case with stuff that we read. But this, because it's a anthology, there's so many different perspectives. It's not necessarily a single narrative thread. I'm interested to see how I put together what I want to talk about.
Absolutely. But what I have read so far has been just
absolutely
brilliant and incredible. So we'll figure it out. Come join us next week. You'll find out what we do. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube. Sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes, thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. We'll talk to you next week.